to order our public hearing regarding our proposed amendments to the Planning and Zoning Code of the City of Sharonville. Mr. Creech.
Good evening, City Council. This item is ordinance number 2022-22. It's actually a recommendation from the City Planning Commission by way of their resolution 2202. It's for the adoption of the updated zoning code for the City of Sharonville. The last major update was done in 1983, so this was a big project that followed on the heels of the comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2019. So this project was followed up, like I said, with the comprehensive plan. It started in September of 2020, went on for about 14 months. We had a steering committee that was made up of local stakeholders. We really appreciate all the meetings they attended. There were 14 months worth of meetings. There were lots of staff meetings. During that time, we also shared information with the Planning Commission as the project moved forward at regular updates to just let them know where we were going. And I did want to, before I turn it over to Wendy, to recognize those steering committee members who put in all that time. When we started off, there were a lot of Zoom meetings, and then eventually we started meeting in person. So we really appreciate all of their input throughout that process. We had a lot of spirited debates, I'll say, and really these were people, and you probably recognize a lot of those names. They brought to the process a lot of skills and experience in different things, but all of it related to zoning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Wendy Moeller, who will give us the details. Thank you.
And if you guys could make sure you're talking into the mic with the fans on, it's really hard to hear. Yep. Thank you.
All right. Well, and I should say that we did have a little overlap with the plan, but then COVID hit. So we were a little delayed. There was a little break in there while we were deciding how to safely meet. Again, for those of you who don't remember me, my name is Wendy Moeller from Compass Point Planning, and I've been facilitating this process since we started with the plan. And this is it. This is the final meeting. Really excited to have worked with the city. I know you have a lot on your agenda today, so I'm just going to kind of, for those of you who haven't heard this presentation a couple of times, I'm going to quickly go through some of the just big highlights of changes beyond just a complete reorganization. We did reorganize. We tried to make it easier to use, but we didn't, start from scratch. So, what people were zoned today, for the most part, are zoned, or yesterday, are going to be zoned in the new one. So, in the first chapter, one of the things we did was just consolidate all of the general provisions. We expanded the purpose statement. More importantly, for this time period, once this goes effective, is what happens to something that starts this review process right now. They'll have the option to continue under the current code, or if they like the new code better, which some might, they can go through the new code as well. And the other thing we added, because Sharonville, like every other city, gets a lot of requests to enforce homeowners association agreements and such. We have a special provision in there that makes it abundantly clear that the city is not responsible for that. They are responsible for the zoning. With the zoning districts themselves, like I said, for the most part, people remained zoned the way they are. We did kind of combine, or depending on how you looked at it, we combined the general business and general business apartment. The purpose of the general business apartment district was to allow for mixed use. Well, we allow that now in the general business as a conditional use. So we've made it a little easier to do that without getting a zone change. One of the biggest things I think we went back and forth on is we eliminated the Mosteller Road Economic Development Overlay District, in part because where it is located right now isn't operating how the intent was, which was more of a jobs creation thing. So we made sure that the industrial districts really accommodate all of those, but there was no need for that overlay district anymore. And then the other big thing we did was consolidated I think it was 6 PUD types. We established one procedure, which actually follows the procedure you have been using, even though some of them didn't follow that in the code itself. And we just set out some clear standards so that you can evaluate each development on a case-by-case basis. Now, you're largely built out. We weren't expecting lots and lots of PUDs, but there could be redevelopment options that come in front of the city, and this is going to give you some flexibility if a unique redevelopment opportunity comes to the city that's not accommodated in one of the base zoning districts. So easier to understand and use. I think one of the biggest things we did was create these use tables. We took a whole bunch of pages out of your code and translated how uses are allowed across all these zoning districts into tables. Each of the uses are defined. We pretty methodically went through these use tables to decide, you know, if uses that were conditional, should they remain conditional? Were they ones that maybe they're appropriate if they had a bigger lot or something and we can make them permitted with standards? So we spent a lot of time on this, just talking about the uses that should be allowed, uses that should be prohibited, and kind of refining this table. And then we have the overlay districts. One of the other big things we did is you had the Northern Lights Overlay District already, and you had a separate document with all the design standards and guidelines. We took all of those and moved them into the ordinance, so now you don't have to deal with two different documents. It's all embedded. The thing about that and the thing about reviewing that is, one, you had a lot of language in the overlay district that would be good for any business districts. So exterior lighting requirements to keep it from blaring into adjacent residential, we made that applicable to all non-residential districts, not just the overlay district. So, you know, we kind of looked at every standard and guideline in there and said, is this appropriate still? Or is this something that could be used broader in Sharonville? And I think that led to some of the expansion of the design standards. The other thing we did is we did eliminate the expedited site plan review. So if somebody could demonstrate that they met all the standards and half the guidelines, staff could approve it. But the steering committee made the point of, why would we allow them to expedite it through staff, even though they trust staff, when everything else has to go through planning commission to take a look at, since this is a predominantly visual area of the city. And so we decided that it was best that it follows the same rules that all non-residential development does and goes through site plan with planning commission. Then we maintained, after going back and forth on this one as well, we maintained the Reading Road Gateway North Overlay District and maintained all those provisions. I already kind of talked about the plan unit developments. It's pretty easy. Essentially, it's a two-step process. You go through the zoning amendment process, and then you have kind of a final development plan / site plan review with the Planning Commission. The one thing we did expand on is the open space requirements, just to give some clarity on what kind of open space would have to be provided, particularly for residential developments. The other thing we spent a lot of time on, not just creating this use table, but just discussing them, is accessory uses. I had this conversation today with another community. No matter how built out a community is, accessory uses are essentially the lifeblood of community development departments. They are constantly dealing with them. We consolidated them into this single chapter because this chapter is most likely the one that the average resident would look at. How can I put in a pool? How can I put in a garage or shed? Versus they're not necessarily looking, is my home allowed in here? They've got a home. So we really just looked at this, modernized it. We did increase the size of detached accessory buildings to 600 square feet. The reason being is that would accommodate a reasonably sized two-car garage if it was detached, 24 by 24. We clarified the encroachment allowances related to porches and stuff because that had been an ongoing issue. We did change some of the regulations with pools because the BZA was seeing a lot of setback issues with pools. So we focused on the larger setback for the equipment that makes noise and not so much the edge of the water. And then we added provisions for food trucks, temporary tents, solar panels, and some of those type of uses that are very common in modern regulations. General development standards, this is where we kind of put a whole bunch of little standards that didn't generate enough to be in its own chapter. One of the biggest things you'll see in this is it's lengthy because there's a ton of graphics. We included all of the lot area setback requirements in there. We have graphics for every type of lot. What's a corner lot? What are the front yard setbacks, side yard setbacks, all of that. We did add minimum floor area requirements for dwelling units after discussions with the steering committee. They're very easy to, we weren't trying to be exclusionary, but we wanted to have some baseline sizes, including apartments in the downtown area and some of the commercial areas, which are smaller than what you would see in the residential districts. We expanded the performance standards to apply to all non-residential uses, not just commercial, or not just industrial. So things on noise and light pollution and the such. We updated fences and walls. We took the Northern Lights overlay lighting standards and made them applicable to all non-residential, and then expanded the intersection visibility requirements. So all of that's found in that chapter. Historic preservation, we maintain the current requirements. You only have a handful of sites. The one big thing we did is we did eliminate the separate Sharonville Historic Preservation Commission. They'd met 5 times, I think you'd said, once, and instead have opted to make the Planning Commission responsible for that. So if anything does come up, the Planning Commission could review it. Architectural standards. Right now you have architectural standards that are reviewed as part of the site plan review process for commercial buildings, not industrial and not multifamily. We've expanded that and updated the graphics. So now there's some architectural standards for multifamily buildings, any new ones. And then we just made, again, cleaner standards for commercial buildings in the city if they're new. And so what you had was pretty modern. They just were kind of hidden in the site plan review process. Landscaping standards, the one thing we did here was you had about 1 paragraph of landscaping and screening standards in your current code under 1125.11. It was intended to provide buffering primarily between non-residential uses and residential. That was the intent. We just tried to give some clarity and then kind of scale it. So if it's industrial next to residential, it'd be more extensive. So we went with the higher level of what you have now. Versus if it's like a neighborhood or local business, small business adjacent to residential, it's, the buffering is still required, but it's not as extensive as the industrial uses. And then we added some language that would, for larger parking lots, add some landscaping just to soften it up. Parking, access, connectivity, we just modernized this. We reduced some of the standards. So you shouldn't have a need for excessive parking requirements. We added provisions for drive-throughs, so essentially to make sure that they don't end up on the roads. Some of these get pretty extensive. And then we also established requirements that would provide for some kind of pedestrian kind of connection between any public sidewalk and a business entrance. It doesn't have to be extensive, it could be painted. But it just makes sure that if somebody is walking on what sidewalks you have, that they can get to the local businesses. Signs, I think I've spoken on this 800 times with everybody here, but this is where we had to do a lot of changes to address legal concerns because of federal court cases. We did have to eliminate most references to the message of sign, so we couldn't have special provisions for a real estate sign as compared to a political sign or a construction sign, because those are all based on the message. So we focused in more on what is the type of sign. Is it a yard sign? Is it a window sign? Is it a feather sign? Is it temporary? Is it permanent? And tried to just give more clarification on that. And I spent a lot of time working with staff on that since they are responsible for enforcement. We added some language that would give signage for both a primary facade, so the main facade, but then if you've got buildings that largely face a parking lot or on corner, there's secondary facade signage, again trying to give businesses the best opportunity to let people know they're there. We've expanded some flexibility by talking about different options people can do with signage on their buildings. It doesn't have to just be a wall sign, it could be a projecting sign, a blade sign, different things that are still attached to the wall. And then we clarified standards for the digital signage, but still maintain them as conditional use, which is kind of how you do it today. Temporary signs are limited to the portable sidewalk signs, temporary yard signs, feather signs, and banners. We tried to, again, this is one of the more that's challenging without referencing a message, because it's the one we see the most common regulations for. But we tried to kind of balance the difference between having the regulations and having the teeth you need it with the realities of enforcement. And then focus primarily on the maximum size of any given temporary sign. Subdivision design, this is easy, we kept it. We cleaned it up, we reorganized it, but otherwise it's fine. The decision-making roles and authorities, again, we kept all of the boards. The only other board we eliminated was the Architectural Review Board. I already told you about the Historic Preservation. Again, they weren't meeting very often, and really it's something the Planning Commission can handle, so to kind of keep your volunteers tight, we kind of eliminated those two boards. Clarified voting rules for other boards to make sure that it's a concurrence of the majority of the board, not just the quorum. So if you have 3 people, it takes all 3 of them to concur on a 5-member board. Review procedures, this, again, very quickly, just consolidated all the review procedures in there and tried to clarify all of those with, and gave them all review criteria. We have a common review standard or common review requirements section that has all the kind of stuff you would see repeated throughout and for every procedure. It talks about fees and how to apply and who's responsible. Each procedure has a step-by-step process and specific review criteria, so each board should know what they're looking at when making a decision. And then again, maintain most procedures with some minor additions and modifications, including, I think, Paul, one of the things you would hope to see was the administrative waiver, so that's in there. We formalized the certificate of zoning approval process / zoning permit. You actually have that, you do that now, but it's not in the code. So we made it abundantly clear that it's in there. It could be tied to a building permit, or for things that don't require a building permit, it's just kind of a letter of approval. Added the administrative waiver process, and then we added another process called the alternative equivalency review. This is like the positive variance. So if somebody could come in and say, listen, I know you're requiring this screening of my parking lot, and this is what you're requiring me to do, but I've got a much better idea. I want to use the Sharonville logo and create some kind of art to screen it. You could say, oh, that's actually nicer than if it was screened the way we wanted it. It's not a variance, we're not lessening the standard. So the Planning Commission would hold a public hearing and they could judge if it meets or exceeds the standard as an alternative. So this is trying to look for some creativity that's out there without having them meet that practical difficulty or necessary hardship requirement of a variance. We did maintain the use variance provision, and I bring that up because that's been a point of discussion here. But we tried to make it a lot more difficult to achieve approval, and part of that is there's got to be a pre-existing building that couldn't be otherwise used for some other approved use. Typically, in communities, I would use the example of like an old church in a residential district. Not really ideal for residential, but maybe you don't want the church torn down. So there could be a use like an office or something that would be appropriate to use just while that building stands. So we did do that, and again, made it as difficult to get that approval as possible. Nonconformities, grandfathering. We just made cleaner distinctions between nonconforming uses, which are the things you're trying to get rid of, and nonconforming structures, which are, the use is fine, but it's in the setback and such. We do allow for the rebuilding of all nonconforming dwellings, regardless of how much destruction. No city council wants to tell somebody they can't rebuild their house. And it's very difficult in current times to get financing for a non-conforming house. So it makes it difficult for people to sell their homes. So that's something we're seeing added to a lot of ordinances, and it's something we had a discussion about to allow. Enforcement and penalties, again, wrapping this up, carried forward most of them. We did expand the penalties provision based on recently updated property maintenance penalties. So that should have already been reviewed by council. And then the definitions, we completely consolidated all the chapters into one glossary chapter. We eliminated all the definitions of terms not used, and then we kind of updated everything based on what you have now. All of the land uses, all the accessory uses are all defined in there, so it's a much longer set of definitions than you already have, but should be very helpful to staff. So with that, I don't know, do you have the language that we talked about? Okay, I can remember it. Huh? That's okay. In discussions since the Planning Commission meeting, there are two general, I'm gonna look at the language that we would like to change, some minor adjustments based on things that have come up since the Planning Commission meeting. One of the issues is related to drive-throughs and pickup windows in the central business district. We want to make sure that if those are considered, one, they are conditional use already, so that's not a problem, but they're associated with a full restaurant use or like a bank that actually has internal activities. So we are suggesting a modification of the definition of restaurants to include the service of beverages. So a coffee shop, you know, if they serve coffee only, that would still be classified as a restaurant in the definitions. And then also in section 111101 G6, add that drive-through facilities and pickup windows may only be considered in the CBD when accessory to a restaurant, financial institution, or other use where the majority of services are provided to customers indoors. For example, no standalone ATMs, coffee kiosk with no seating, etc. So that just provides a little bit more clarity on the expectations for drive-throughs and pickup windows downtown. And then the second issue is related to an issue that came up in the news recently with private clubs for poker and gambling kind of operations, which obviously the state regulates. But just to be clear where the city stands, we wanted to add some language in section 110502. B5D, we would add a statement that says any gambling activity that is not expressly allowed by state law within a building or use allowed under this code is essentially prohibited. That's our list, a specific list of prohibited uses. So those are the kind of edits we would like to suggest that if council approves this tonight, that they would accept those as part of the approved ordinance. So with that, I am here to answer questions, or John is as well.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank John Creech and his staff and Wendy Muller of Compass Point Planning for a job well done. I had the pleasure of sitting on multiple meetings and providing input and listening to what they had to say. And usually I'm on the other end of the staff in terms of drafting regulations for communities, so I know how challenging it can be for every community, but I fully believe that they've developed a new zoning code that is modern, that will implement our recently adopted comprehensive plan, and that completely follows state and federal law, as well as kind of providing some relief for the things that go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, because my 15 years on the Board of Zoning Appeals, there were things there that we just shouldn't have been hearing through common sense, and we were granting the variances. And so they realized that, you know, there was a trend there, and it was an acceptable trend, and they've made those appropriate changes to the code. So I think that would benefit the residents, make life a little bit easier for the boards, but also allow the city to continue to develop and redevelop in a manner which is quality. So thank you both.
Thank you very much, all of you, for all your hard work. We appreciate it. Anyone in the audience want to speak on this? Seeing none, I'm going to close out our public hearing. And I'm going to call to order the City of Sharonville's council meeting. If everyone would please rise, we're going to have a moment of silent prayer. Then Glenn Lovett is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You can be seated. Roll call, please.
Mr. Tankersley?
Here.
Mr. Wilson?
Here.
Mr. Coulter?
Here.
Mr. Levitt?
Here.
Mr. Cook?
Here.
Mrs. Knight? Here. Mr. Schmidt?
Here.
Approval of the minutes from our April 26th regular council meeting. Is there any objections or corrections? Seeing none, those stand as written and distributed. We're going to ride on to reports and communication. Mayor Hardman.
Well, to start my report off, I'm going to call on Chief Sunderman, who is going to make a very special recognition this evening.
Has to be burning up in that outfit.
What do you think? Greetings, everybody. How is everybody today? Can you hear me? The fire department would like to present to Andy Bauer a life-saving award in recognition of his actions at the fire that we had in Greensfelder on March 24th, 2022. So, Andy, I've said this to you before, we really appreciate your help, and everybody knows what Andy's first response is, oh, I didn't do much. Well, forgive me for saying this, but you're very wrong. You know, not only did you have all of those residents outside, you had every one of those people accounted for, to the point where he could say, that's Mary Jane, and that's unit number 1, and that's Betty Sue, and that's unit number, you know, it's just, I don't think you realize how important that is when we pull up on a scene like that. So not only did you take very good care of your residents, but when we pull up to a fire scene, and I happen to be in the area, I happen to be the first one there, as we're assessing the scene and trying to make an incident action plan, one of the things that we think about is what kind of risk are we going to take? And that risk is based on what is the possible reward. If we are going to possibly save a life, we ask these folks back here to take incredible risk to their own body and their own health. If we're just trying to save drywall and 2x4s, that becomes very different. Well, because you were there, because you had everybody accounted for within the first 2 minutes, we've listened to the tapes over and over, within 2 minutes, not only did he have everybody accounted for, but found out that one person was at Kroger. I don't even know how you pulled that off. You kept the firefighters from taking some very incredible risks. And for that, we can't thank you enough.
Didn't do anything any of the other crew wouldn't have done, I don't think. I think I'm more of a hero for getting them chairs to sit in when they were in the grass than anything. So, yeah. Thank you.
And we're going to take just a small break so we can take some family pictures.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we'll. Congratulations again, Andy.
All right, so the rest of my report this evening, I am excited to let you all know that we have hired an economic development director. Excuse me, Elena Gears. She passed all of her pre-employment type of stuff, and she will be starting with us 2 weeks from yesterday. So we are excited to welcome Elena. She's got about 9-10 years of economic development experience, the last almost 3 years in the city of Middletown. I think she's got some great experience. I think you guys are really going to get to know and like Elena, and I'm very looking forward to introducing her to our business community and future prospects. So I hope that you guys will join me in welcoming her in a couple of weeks, and I know we'll have her here so you can meet her. We are working on the transition from Josh with our IT world. We thought we would be in a period of potential contracting. We still could be there, but we've got a good lead on a candidate that we might very well have a replacement for him in due time too. So we'll get you more information about that as it comes about. I want to make sure to invite you all Sunday morning from 11:30 until 2 to the dedication of our Sharonville Police Department in memory of former Chief Steve Vanover. So the events will start at 11:30. I think they'll be speaking and stuff around 11:45, noon. But obviously, there'll be people there celebrating and remembering Steve and the great work he did in making that facility possible until 2 o'clock on Sunday. So hopefully you will take some time out of your day to do that, as I will before I go down to my daughter's graduation. With that said, that is all I have from, the one I shouldn't forget. Sorry about the temperature in here. We are working on that. There are problems. There is also delay issues. So this may not be the last council meeting that we will sit in some heat, but we are certainly trying to get that problem solved as quickly as we can, so that we can all be a little cooler, and those who come in attendance in their wonderful full uniform gear can feel better as well. So I would just plan at least our next council meeting being in your polos as well. So other than that, that's all I have.
Are there any questions for the mayor? Seeing none, we'll move on to our Safety Service Director, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you. John's not here, but I did want to publicly thank John for all of his efforts. I know, I was going to mention that. For all of his efforts, you know, in a 10 or 15 minute presentation, you really can't understand how much effort went into the zoning code update. I think the last one was done in the 80s, if I remember right, and Wendy did outstanding work, the committee did outstanding work, but John really went above and beyond in terms of his efforts with that, and just wanted to publicly mention that. John's entering now, so we'll move to the legislation. We asked them to type out the changes that they were referring to in the presentation, and John, do we have copies for everybody? Okay.
Thank you.
Would council like copies in front of them? Why don't you make copies for everybody? I'll just go to the next item. Ordinance 2022-26E is a second and third reading for a change with our EMS billing provider. Chief Sunderman's here tonight to talk about that.
Good evening again. We started looking into changing our EMS billing company about 2 months ago. This was partly out of necessity. The company that we're currently using does not mesh up very well with the new EMS reporting software that we have had to go to. I could go into great detail and make everybody's eyes glaze over, but it has to do with the inputting of information from the Hamilton County Communication Center that goes into our reports, and then they actually have to extract that out for billing. And that's what really got us going down this path. So we found a company called MedAccounts that many of our neighboring departments are using. We've talked to them, and we've also talked to MedAccount. And I'm actually pretty excited to go this direction in the fact that their reporting systems are much better. We're able to gather much more data from them, and their billing is actually a little more simplified. And part of what I found when we were looking at this agreement is it looks like in 2008, EMS billing rates went to council, and part of the legislation that I proposed in front of you is that those billing rates be handled administratively. And part of the reason for that is this new company, once a year at a minimum, if we request 2 times a year, once a quarter, they will show us exactly where Sharonville is billing for EMS in comparison to 20 other agencies surrounding us. So we can use that as the sort of the standard, and Medicare and Medicaid billing rates are changing pretty frequently, and more specifically, mileage rates are changing very frequently right now because of the cost of fuel. So if we were able to handle that administratively, I think that would allow that to flow a little bit more seamlessly.
Are there any questions about this? Perfect.
All right,
Thank
very
you.
good. Thank you all.
All right, moving back to ordinance 2022-22, that was the subject of the public hearing tonight. You have the proposed changes that Wendy and John referenced in front of you. And then resolution 2022 R14E concerns a potential OKI application. Steve's here tonight to talk about that.
Evening. This resolution is just providing authority to apply for a OKI CMAQ SPGB grant for the downtown loop. Kleinger's did master plan downtown with changes a few years ago. Originally in that plan, the entire north and south loop, portions of the loop was in one phase. They've gone back and looked at the construction costs given today's dollars, and based on likely grant award amounts, have suggested that we break it into 2 different phases, a northbound phase and a southbound phase. Go after funding for one at a time. Each direction, northbound and southbound, has come in with engineering design and construction costs somewhere around just over $5 million. So the loop total would be over $10 million, northbound, southbound. This does have a healthy contingency in it. It does also include the design costs for the project, so and some inflation. We're suggesting an 80-20 match, which is the minimum we can do with OKI, and we see basically to see where we score. If we get awarded, great. If not, and we want to be more aggressive at it next year, we go after it with more aggression. But this resolution in front of you is to go after what we recommend and Kleinger's agreed with. I recommend and Kleinger's agreed with. I think Jim agreed with. Would be to go after the southbound portion of the loop, the Reading Road, for this roundabout. Any questions?
Did you say you're going after the southbound? Sorry, thank you. There we go. Are you going after the southbound portion first before the northbound? As I understand that to be?
Yes.
Okay. And the reasoning behind that, I'm just wondering.
Well, we've got Creek Road and Depot Square going now, hopefully this summer.
Okay.
Southbound will tie that in better and kind of finalize that portion of the downtown before we move on to the northbound.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Very much.
And that's it for the legislation this evening.
If I have a question on what was just handed out to us on the zoning code, do I ask that now or later?
No, you can ask it now, that's fine.
Okay, just one question for clarification, John and Wendy. Item number 2 for the drive-through facilities for the central business district, do those drive-throughs have standards for the drive-through facilities? And if they do, are they different from any drive-through facility in a general business district in the city?
There are standards for all drive-throughs and all pickup points, and it is conditionally reviewed use. So the planning commission will look at them all in accordance with those standards. They are, I mean, you don't have standards for so they're designed to try to get them in the back of the building and, if you're near residents, to keep the audio down and stuff like that. So some basic design and buffering principles and that's what I think.
But it would be reviewed before planning commission?
Yes.
Okay.
All drive-throughs are conditional use.
All right, great, thank you.
Are we okay? Perfect, thank you.
Just to clarify what we need to do with regard to these changes, will council need to, when they make a motion to pass the ordinance, will they need to amend the language to include this, or because it's third reading, this is included? I'm just, because obviously planning commission didn't see these particular changes. I think you should proceed with this tonight. I think these are good changes that we just didn't anticipate, and we're looking forward, and rather than having to go all the way back through the process, but I'm just trying to figure out how, do you, Mr. Lippert, have some suggestions on how that should be handled appropriately?
I think council should entertain a motion to amend, based on what I looked in, Title VII of the Ohio Revised Code. Planning Commission didn't necessarily need to review this because this is an ordinance change, not a zoning change. This is a ordinance change to the zoning ordinances. But since it's been on the agenda the last two council meetings, this is up for third reading tonight, I think the cleanest way to do it would be to offer a motion to amend from one of the council members.
So when there'll be a motion for passage of an ordinance, then hopefully somebody will make a motion to amend, add these, vote on that, and then you vote on the amendment.
That's what I remember from student government day,
I think
yes.
that's what I learned 2 weeks
Listen,
ago too.
I have Matthew Hardman on speed dial. He is ready to step in at any point. Thank you for clarifying all that, because I was going with the amended. Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Lucas? Seeing none, I just want to bring a couple things to our attention. We have 5 Tuesdays this month, so we won't meet again till May 31st. And then we're into our summer months, June and July. We only have one meeting each month. You are allowed to wear your polos and your shorts in on those meetings. We are more casual for the new council people. Hopefully we'll have air conditioning, but don't count on it. And then I have had a request by the Sharonville Cultural Arts Center if we would please entertain the idea of having a council table at their event. And I'm going to put it out there so you can get it on your calendars. It's August 13th. It's a Saturday at our convention center, and they haven't had a really good fundraiser in a few years, so they're looking forward to this one. And they would like for us to have at least a city council table, and they would also like us to maybe donate a basket. So I'm going to say by the July meeting, if you could let me know if you would like to A, be part of the table, and B, if you could either donate money and I will put it towards baskets, or if you bring me in gift cards from, we like to support our small businesses, so like the Blue Goose or Third Eye or Firecracker Bakery or Anthenians, those kind of restaurants. If we could, let's support them, and maybe at least a $25 gift card, if not more. Any questions? Okay, that's all of my report. Thank you all very much. And we'll go on to Clerk of Council, Mrs. Buhite.
Hi, thanks. You read my mind. So I was just going to mention that the dates for summer is June 21st and July 19th. So they're not our typical Tuesdays. And the next thing is just a liquor permit from Raoul Petroleum LLC, which is the Sharonville BP on Hawk Road, requested a liquor license, and there were no objections, and that was signed and returned on May 4th.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll move on to our Law Director, Mr. Lippert.
Thank you. No report, but I am requesting an executive session to discuss disputed subject of pending court action is allowed by Ohio Revised Code, Section 121.22, subsection G3.
Perfect, thank you. And will we need to do business after this? After that, or we can do it at the very end?
We can do it at the end. There's nothing to vote on.
will be a meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals tomorrow night at 6:30. Mr. Creech has submitted the agenda for tomorrow night's meeting. The Planning Commission meeting has been canceled for tomorrow night. And also, Mr. Creech has also submitted the minutes to the meeting for the Board of Zoning Appeals that took place in April.
Oh, okay, perfect, thank you. Community Services, Mr. Lovett?
Yes, my report is on file with Ms. Buhite. A couple highlights real quick. Number one, I don't know if any of you guys have been to Gorman recently. Please go. The school has now been torn down. I believe in the next, Michael's not here, but I think in the next 30 days, the splash pad, maybe in the next 2 weeks, the splash pad should be turning on. A lot of fun things happening over there. If you've got kids or grandkids, please take them over. Number two, not to jump on Sue here, swim team is coming up and running. Enrollment's it's in like 2 weeks from today, isn't it? Yeah, it starts in about 2 weeks after school, swim team. So if you know kids or grandkids that want to be on swim team, please have them join. Yeah, that's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Budget and Finance, Mr. Cook?
Thank you. No report this evening. We did meet this evening as a committee, and I'll have my report at the next council meeting. And then into project oversight, our next meeting for project oversight will be June 21st at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Honored citizens, Mrs. Knight.
Yes, tonight I'm going to honor all the Sharonville graduates, both from high school and college. I'd like to wish them the best of luck in all their future endeavors. I know we have a mayor's daughter's graduating, and Paul's daughter graduated from Ohio State. If anybody else, but congratulations.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. Law and Public Safety, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you. The next Law and Public Safety Committee meeting will be May 24th. Again, we have 5 Tuesdays, 4 p.m. Administrative Conference Room. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Rule suspension motion. Is there a motion to have second and third reading for ordinance 2022-26E with immediate effectivity and first and only reading for resolution 2022R14E with immediate effectivity? So moved by Mr. Coulter, second by Mr. Wilson. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, yes?
Yes.
All those opposed, no, and that does carry. We'll go to unfinished business, please.
Okay. This is the third reading of ordinance 2022-22, amending Part 11 of the Sharonville Codified Ordinances, commonly known as the Planning and Zoning Code.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2022-22? So moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mrs. Knight. Is there any discussion? Now's the amendment. Now's the amendment. Who wants to make the
I
amendment?
was going to say, can we make an amendment to the ordinance with changes
Yes.
to add, please?
Do you want those as written?
As written, yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you. We do have a motion to accept the written changes to this ordinance. Is there, Mr. Tankersley has made the motion. Is there a second? So moved by Mr. Wilson. Roll call, please, on the amendment.
Okay. Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this ordinance? Seeing none, we can do roll call on the amended ordinance.
Okay. Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Okay. That ordinance has been approved.
Thank you. And thank you all for your hard work. Very much appreciated. Okay. Now we'll move on to, we still have unfinished business.
Okay. This is a second and third reading of Emergency Ordinance 2022-26E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with Medi-Count to provide EMS billing, allow billing rates to be adjusted without further legislation, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2022-26E? So moved by Mr. Tankersley, second by Mr. Lovett. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Love, Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2022-26E has been approved. Sure. First and only reading of Resolution 2022-R14E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to prepare and submit a funding application to the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments for improvements to Reading Road between Cornell Road and Sharon Road, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass Resolution 2022-R14E? So moved by Mrs. Knight, second by Mr. Cook. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Resolution 2022-R14E has been approved.
Perfect. There are no residents to be heard this evening, so we will move on. Are there any other matters? Go ahead, Mrs. Knight.
I just have a couple of things. First of all, at our senior citizens meeting this Monday, I'm having Chief Nevis come and speak to my seniors about all these phone scams where these seniors are getting scammed for money from grandparents saying, "Grandma, I need money." An example, this one lady was somewhere in Texas, I think, and she was trying to mail $9,000, and she couldn't figure out how to do it. And this man came up and said, "What are you trying to do?" And so I'm trying to help my grandson. He's in Africa somewhere, and I'm going to send him $9,000 cash. So he's going to come and speak to that. And then on the 23rd, I have Steve Bosom coming to talk to my seniors about some of the road improvements, because they keep asking me questions and I have no answers. Me and Paul. So anyway. And then one more thing. The root beer stand is now serving mugs. Our outside counter is open. So you can walk up, order, everything comes out to you just like it was at the counter inside. So Eric's doing a lot of improvements for that. So
Perfect, thank you. I did want to mention, several of us served with Janet North. Her husband passed away last Saturday. Earl was, I believe, 88 years old, and his service will be on the 21st at the United Methodist Church. So I just wanted to share that information. Is there a motion to go into executive session regarding Ohio Revised Code, Section 121.22G3, conferencing with our attorney for public body concerning dispute involving the public body that are subject of pending or imminent court action? Is there a motion? So moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mr. Lovett. Roll call.
Mr. Tankersley? Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to assume this is all elected, and Mr. Lucas? And Mr. Mark McKeon, you may please join us. Thank you.